man who became the most recognized doctor in the show's history got the role while he was working construction, and he almost didn't know he'd been cast. Tonight, we're looking at the version of Doctor Who that millions of American men grew up with on PBS, and why that version wasn't quite what the BBC itself signed off on. We're covering why the most beloved era of the show generated complaints from inside its own network. What links two separate pieces of that generation's nostalgia to a single casting decision? And why a man who left the role in 1981 has now spent more years coming back to it than he ever spent playing it on television. 7 hidden truths about the Fourth Doctor era, starting with the one that reframes what you think you watched.
Say the alphabet backwards, come on. Z, Y.
Number 1. The Boston Edit. The Doctor who an entire generation of American men grew up watching was never exactly what the BBC produced. TARDIS fandom's PBS coverage places the American history of the show not at a national network deal, but at a single station, KTEH in San Jose, which began airing the series in 1976, 2 years after Tom Baker's era had already started in the UK. From there, WGBH Boston became the national distributor for PBS stations across the country, the hub that decided how the show actually reached American living rooms. The BBC produced Doctor Who in individual 25-minute episodes, built for weekly broadcast in Britain. That distinction matters because it means which cliffhanger led into which resolution could shift from station to station without the BBC ever knowing. WGBH, working to fit American scheduling blocks, sometimes cut multiple episodes together into longer omnibus versions, feature-length cuts that never existed in that form on British television and were never approved by the people who made the show. No one from the original Hinchcliffe-era production team is on record as having been consulted about scheduling convenience, or something more editorial was never written down anywhere the sources could find. It's a detail that rarely comes up in casual conversation about the show, precisely because the seams of that edit were designed not to show. An American viewer in 1976 had no way of knowing they were watching a reassembled version rather than the original broadcast structure. What that means is quiet but significant. The version you remember watching every week may have been shaped in a Boston edit bay, not in a London studio.
And I brought it here. It got into the TARDIS.
Number 2. Cast off a building site. The man who'd hold the role longer than anyone else in the classic series wasn't working as an actor when he got it. Tom Baker was laboring on a building site when Barry Letts, the outgoing producer, chose him as the Fourth Doctor in 1974. Letts had seen Baker in the 1973 film The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, and by the account that survived, that single impression was enough to build a decision around. The casting reached the press before Baker himself had been formally told the part was his. There was no audition Baker sat through, no screen test on record, no shortlist he competed against. Just a producer watching a fantasy film, deciding privately, and Baker learning the news the way everyone else in Britain did. From the announcement, there was no fallback candidate on record either. Letts had changed his mind after seeing Baker on that building site. There's no documented name for who came next. He'd go on to hold the role for 7 seasons, 1974 to 1981, longer than any other actor in the classic era, defining the part for a generation that had no idea how close the whole thing came to happening some other way. It started on a building site, and the film about Sinbad.
Nasty Roman sex, supposed to have died out in the 3rd century.
Number 3. The Sinbad Connection. The film that put Tom Baker in the TARDIS was a Ray Harryhausen production, and that connection lands differently if you grew up on both. The Golden Voyage of Sinbad, released by Columbia in 1973, was exactly the kind of Harryhausen stop-motion fantasy that filled Saturday afternoons and school holiday slots for that generation of kids. Baker played the villain Cora in it, dark, physically commanding, magnetic even through the film's heightened theatrical style. Per TARDIS fandom's account of the casting, that performance is specifically what caught Barry Letts' attention while he was searching for someone to follow Jon Pertwee into the role. The chain runs straight through. Harryhausen's creature effects needed a human antagonist strong enough to hold his own against them on screen. Baker supplied that as Cora, and Letts recognized the same commanding quality in him for the Doctor. It's a reminder that casting decisions rarely start with the role itself. They start with a producer remembering something they saw somewhere else entirely. 2 separate objects of nostalgia for the same generation, joined at a single casting call made in 1974. The man who unsettled you in one film became the man an entire childhood trusted in another. Number 4. the BBC's own complaints.
The most creatively celebrated stretch of Baker's run was also the one that drew documented pressure from inside the BBC itself. The period spanning roughly 1975 to 1977, under producer Philip Hinchcliffe and script editor Robert Holmes, is now widely considered the creative peak of the Fourth Doctor era. Gothic horror, body dread, and imagery darker than the show had attempted before it. It was also flagged internally by the BBC's Programme Complaints Committee, the network's own standards review body, as pushing past what they considered appropriate for the show's early evening time slot. TARDIS fandom's record confirms the controversy and names the Hinchcliffe-Holmes period as its center, though no single serial is documented as having been pulled from broadcast or formally banned outright. The pressure was institutional and sustained rather than dramatic. A producer pushing toward the dark, an organization pulling steadily back. And it's cited as a factor in Hinchcliffe's eventual departure from the program. What most PBS viewers remember today as the show's defining register barely survived that internal tension intact. What replaced it, under incoming producer Graham Williams, was a noticeably lighter tone, one some fans accepted and others never quite forgave. Number 5. The Companion Who Endured. The Companion who bridged the Third and Fourth Doctor eras went on to define a character arc spanning nearly 4 decades. Elizabeth Sladen, Elisabeth, not Elizabeth, a distinction worth getting right, joined the show in 1973 as Sarah Jane Smith, introduced opposite John Pertwee and carrying straight into Baker's first 2 seasons. Her departure is documented in the 1976 serial The Hand of Fear. For PBS viewers coming to the show in the late 1970s, she was often their very first model of what a Doctor Who companion could actually be. Curious rather than decorative, grounded rather than shrieking, never quite as passive as the format had sometimes allowed earlier companions to be written. That's harder to pull off than it sounds, and it's a large part of why viewers who only ever saw her on PBS still bring her up unprompted. What happened after her departure is just as notable as the original run. Sladen returned for the revived series in 2006 and then led the Sarah Jane Adventures as its own lead performer until her passing in 2011. First appearance to final work in the role, 38 years, beginning under one Doctor entirely and ending as the star of a program built around her. Number 6. The Uncertain Return. 32 years after leaving the role, Tom Baker came back to it, and by the record that exists, that return wasn't settled until close to the moment it actually happened. Baker's original television run ended in 1981 with the serial Logopolis. In 2013, for the 50th anniversary special, The Day of the Doctor, he appeared in a meaningful dramatic capacity. The first classic-era Doctor to return to the revived show in that particular way. Baker has described his own participation as genuinely uncertain right up until production began. What the backup plan would have looked like had he ultimately declined isn't recorded in any source available here. That gap in the record is real, and it stays open. And it's worth remembering that The Day of the Doctor is remembered today as if Baker's return had always been inevitable, when the record suggests it was anything but. 50 years is a long time for any production to still be treating one actor's private decision as load-bearing to the entire event. For viewers who first found Baker on PBS decades earlier, watched the original show end, and then watched it return transformed, that 2013 appearance carried real weight. It wasn't nostalgia programming dressed up as an event. It was the production treating its own history as something still dramatically alive, worth the risk of getting wrong.
You're the finest swordsman I ever saw was a captain in Cleopatra's bodyguard.
Number 7. Beyond Television. In audio. Baker left the television role in 1981. Decades later, according to his official site and TARDIS fandom's biography, he began recording original Fourth Doctor stories for Big Finish Productions, a company built entirely around full-cast audio drama performed by the original television actors. He has now spent more years returning to the role in audio than he ever spent playing it on screen the first time around. None of that was planned when he first put on the coat in 1974. It's simply what the role became once other people decided it was worth continuing. Sit with that for a second. A role that started on a building site by way of a Harryhausen fantasy film, ran 7 seasons on television, and then kept going in a medium that didn't exist yet when he first put on that coat and that scarf. The companion actors came back for it. The old villains came back for it. The scripts reached places a BBC television budget in the 1970s never could have afforded to go. Baker's audio-era Doctor isn't quite the 1974 version, and it isn't quite the 1981 one either. It's something built on both, decades apart,
by the same man. What survived wasn't the physical object of the show itself. It was what people kept choosing to invest in it, one format after another. The Doctor Who that reached American living rooms was shaped by decisions made far from the BBC. A broadcast schedule set in San Jose, an editing suite in Boston, and a casting choice that traces all the way back to a Harryhausen film from 1973. Here's what's still genuinely unresolved. WGBH's omnibus edits happened, and that much is documented beyond dispute. But no one has recorded exactly what guided those editorial decisions, or whether anything was ever trimmed for content rather than simply for time. That's not a small gap. It's the difference between a show you think you know completely and one you've only seen through someone else's edits. If you watched Doctor Who on PBS in the late 1970s or early 1980s, there's a real chance you were watching a version assembled by people the original production team never once met. Which version do you remember? And do you think it was the one the BBC actually made?